My brother looked me dead in the eye across the dinner table and said, "The business was never really yours. You just answered phones and kept the lights on." Then he laughed. My father laughed too, softer, the way he always did when he wanted to agree with something without fully committing to it. My sister-in-law smiled at her wine glass. The word phones landed somewhere behind my sternum and stayed there. I remember the smell of that kitchen. My mother used to cook Sunday roasts in that house, and somehow 30 years later the walls had absorbed it, that faint warmth of rosemary and fat and something sweet underneath. The house felt wrong now, louder somehow even when nobody was speaking. I had driven 4 hours from Thunder Bay for this dinner. I remember thinking, on the highway somewhere past Nipigon, that things might go differently this time. We were supposed to be celebrating. My father had finally agreed to formalize the ownership structure of the family business, a plumbing and HVAC company my grandfather started in 1978. 3 locations now, 19 employees. I had been running operations for 8 years. I set down my fork carefully and said nothing. That detail mattered later. The silence. My brother had always mistaken my patience for weakness, the same way my father had, the same way I had let them for years without quite realizing it was happening. 3 days after that dinner, I called a business lawyer in Toronto. The call changed everything. I should explain how I got there. My grandfather built Kowalski Brothers Mechanical with his hands and 2 cousins who eventually drifted away, leaving him the name and the debt. My father inherited it in 1994, when I was 9 and my brother was 14. For the first decade, it barely survived. I remember my father at the kitchen table with manila folders and a calculator at midnight, my mother refilling his coffee without being asked, the 2 of them not speaking, because there was nothing to say that numbers hadn't already said louder. My brother left for university in Vancouver. Business degree, then a comfortable marketing job out west, then a series of lateral moves that kept him comfortable and far away. He came home at Christmas, wore nicer clothes each year, and had opinions about the company without ever learning what a pressure test was. I stayed, not because I had no options. I had a mechanical engineering offer from Lakehead that I deferred, then quietly let expire. I stayed because my father's hands had started shaking by the time I was 22, and someone needed to learn the quoting software. And someone needed to drive to Geraldton when a hotel's boiler failed at 2 in the morning, and that someone was always going to be me. I'm not asking for sympathy explaining this. I'm just establishing the geography of how things worked. By 30, I was running daily operations. By 34, I had opened the 2nd location in Sault Ste. Marie, using financing I personally guaranteed when my father's credit history made the bank hesitant. I signed my name on that loan, not his, mine. The branch turned profitable within 18 months. 2 years after that, I found a struggling competitor in Sudbury and spent 6 months negotiating a quiet acquisition. I structured it through the company, but fronted the due diligence costs personally, while my father was recovering from a knee replacement, and my brother was on a family vacation in Portugal. I remember sending my brother a summary email about the acquisition. He replied 4 days later with, "Sounds good, keep me posted." That was the extent of his involvement in nearly a decade of growth. What I didn't know, or more precisely, what I refused to let myself examine clearly, was that the ownership structure had never been updated after my grandfather's original incorporation documents. My father owned 70%. The remaining 30% was split loosely between the estate of one of the original cousins and a clause my grandfather had written that was ambiguous enough to mean nearly anything depending on who was reading it. My labor had built something substantial. My name was on loan guarantees, supplier contracts, equipment leases. But on paper, in the way that actually mattered when money changed hands, I owned nothing. My brother flew home from Vancouver that spring for the first time in 2 years, not for the anniversary dinner my father had called us together for, but because he had retained his own lawyer 3 weeks earlier. I only found that out later. The dinner itself was a Tuesday in April. Outside the kitchen window, the yard was still half frozen, that particular grey-brown of an Ontario spring that hasn't committed to anything yet. My sister-in-law had brought wine from a Vancouver wine shop, something she mentioned twice. My nephew, who was 7 and completely innocent of everything happening around him, was upstairs playing video games and periodically yelling something triumphant through the floor above us. My father sat at the head of the table, looking pleased in a way that made me uneasy without knowing why. He had aged more than I expected since Christmas. His colour was off. He held his knife differently, I noticed, with more effort than before. My brother was charming all evening. He asked about the Sudbury location. He complimented my father's property. He asked my sister-in-law's opinion on things and listened attentively. I watched him perform warmth the way I had watched him perform competence for years, and I kept waiting for the moment when I would understand why he was here. It came over dessert. My father cleared his throat and said he had been thinking about simplifying things. The word simplifying landed with the careful weight of a word someone had practiced using. Was that he wanted to consolidate the company under a cleaner structure. He thought it made sense, given that my brother was the eldest. He thought it made sense and original intention of the company name, to move the ownership formally to my brother as primary shareholder, while I continued in my operational role. I sat very still. My brother said something about how this would give the company stability going forward, something about his business background being an asset at the board level. He didn't look at me while he said it. That was when he made the phone comment, about me answering phones and keeping the lights on. I excused myself, walked to the bathroom, ran cold water over my wrists for about 45 seconds, which is something I do when I need to think without my chest getting in the way of my brain. Then I walked back to the table, finished my coffee, and said I needed to review any proposed changes with my own legal counsel before anything moved forward. My brother's expression shifted. Not much, just slightly. The way a person's face moves when a situation they thought they controlled has introduced an unexpected variable. My father looked uncomfortable. I think, on some level, he knew what he was doing wasn't entirely right. He just wanted the convenience of not examining it too carefully. I drove back to Thunder Bay 2 days later. The highway was quiet. I stopped at a Tim Hortons outside Nipigon because I needed the pause more than the coffee. I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes watching transport trucks pull through and thought about the loan guarantee I had signed in 2017. The one that had my name at the bottom and my brother's vacation photos in the background. The lawyer I called was named Hutchinson. She worked out of a small firm near King and Spadina and came recommended by a contact I had in the Trades Association. I sent her the original incorporation documents, the loan agreements I had personally guaranteed, the acquisition paperwork from the Sudbury deal, 7 years of email correspondence showing my operational role, and a spreadsheet I had been maintaining for years that logged every significant financial decision I had made or executed on the company's behalf. Accountants maintain records. So do people who have quietly learned not to fully trust the people around them. Ms. Hutchinson called me back 4 days later. Her voice was efficient. She asked several questions before saying anything conclusive. Then she said, "The loan guarantee alone gives you a significant legal interest in the company's assets. The Sudbury acquisition documents are particularly useful. You funded the due diligence personally and executed the deal without a co-signer. We have a strong argument for constructive trust." I asked what that meant in plain terms. She said it meant the courts could recognize my contribution as creating an ownership interest, regardless of what the original incorporation documents said. It wouldn't be fast, it wouldn't be comfortable, but it was legitimate. She also said something that I've thought about almost every week since. People often assume legal reality matches family reality. In your case, the legal reality is considerably more interesting. I want to be clear about something. I did not want to go to war with my father. That sounds like the kind of thing people say to seem reasonable, but I mean it specifically. The man had built something with his hands over decades. His health was declining. I didn't want the last chapter of our relationship to be a lawsuit. What I wanted was proportion. What I wanted was for 8 years of work to be recognized honestly. I wrote my father a letter, handwritten, which felt important. I explained that I respected the family history of the business. I explained what I had contributed with specificity, because specificity is harder to dismiss than emotion. I explained that I had spoken with legal counsel and that I had a legitimate claim to an ownership interest that the current proposed restructuring didn't reflect. I said I would prefer to resolve this as a family before anything became formal. I asked him to respond before the end of the month. He called 3 days later, not to discuss the letter's contents, but to tell me I was being difficult. He said my brother had a family to support. He said my brother had put his life on hold to come home and help with the transition. A sentence I had to repeat back to myself twice to fully absorb. He said I should think about what kind of son I wanted to be. I said I was thinking about it very carefully. What happened next came partly from my brother's own impatience. He had apparently assumed my mention of legal counsel was a bluff, or at least a negotiating position that would soften under family pressure. 3 weeks after my father's phone call, my brother sent an email to our company's accountant directing him to prepare revised ownership transfer documents. He copied my father. He did not copy me. The accountant, to his credit, forwarded me the email chain the same afternoon, with a note that just said, "Thought you should see this." I forwarded it to Ms. Hutchinson within the hour. She filed the first formal notice the following Tuesday. I won't pretend the weeks after that were comfortable. My father called twice. My brother called once, the tone very different from the dinner table, more careful, less certain of the room. An aunt I hadn't spoken to in years sent me a text message explaining that family businesses require compromise, which was generous advice from someone who had never set foot inside one of our service vans. My mother, who had been conspicuously quiet through all of this, called me on a Wednesday evening. I almost didn't answer. We talked for almost an hour. She didn't take sides, not directly. But near the end, she said something that has stayed with me. "Your father knows what you did for that company," she said. "He's just hoping you'll let him not know it officially." That sentence unlocked something I had been trying to name for months. There's a particular kind of family dynamic where your contribution is acknowledged privately and minimized publicly, where the people around you enjoy the stability your work creates, while maintaining the freedom to overlook it whenever acknowledgement would cost them something. It's not malice usually, it's convenience. The arrangement works as long as the reliable person keeps being reliable and doesn't ask the system to formalize what everyone already knows. My brother had come home from Vancouver to formalize the system. He just hadn't anticipated that I had spent 8 years building one of my own. The legal process moved on its own momentum after a certain point. Ms. Hutchinson was methodical and patient. The constructive trust argument held. My personal loan guarantee, combined with documented evidence of the Sudbury acquisition and a pattern of operational control going back 6 years, gave the court enough to work with. My brother retained his own legal representation, a firm out of Vancouver, which added time and cost to everything. At one point, he proposed a settlement that offered me a minority stake of 15% and a formal operations director title. Ms. Hutchinson and I reviewed it together in a brief phone call. We both noted the gap between what 15% represented and what the evidence supported. We declined. There was a period of about 6 weeks when nobody in my family was speaking to me directly. My father communicated through the company accountant. My brother communicated through his lawyer. My sister-in-law sent one text message asking if I understood what I was doing to the family. A message I read 3 times before setting my phone face down on my desk. What kept me steady during that time wasn't anger. Anger is loud and expensive, and it spends itself quickly. What kept me steady was the folder on my desk, the loan documents, the acquisition records, the email chains. Every decision I had made, logged and dated and filed, not because I had anticipated this moment, but because I'm the kind of person who keeps records because the work deserves to be remembered even when the people around you prefer it forgotten. One Thursday evening, my nephew called me from my brother's cell phone. He was 8 years old. He didn't fully understand what was happening, I don't think, but children absorb the emotional temperature of rooms very accurately even when they can't name it. He asked me when I was coming to visit. He said the house felt weird. He said his dad seemed stressed. I told him I'd visit when things got sorted out. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. My apartment overlooked the Cam River. Outside, a pair of Canada geese were crossing the path below, unhurried, stopping occasionally to investigate something in the grass. I wasn't angry at my nephew. I wasn't even angry at my brother, by that point not in the way I had been at the dinner table. I felt something more like clarity, the specific kind that arrives after you've stopped, hoping a situation will resolve itself through everyone's goodwill, and you've accepted that you'll need to see it through on your own terms. The final settlement came on a Friday morning in October, 8 months after the April dinner. 38%. My name recognized formally on the ownership structure, a buyout option at fair market value if either party chose to exit within the next 5 years, valued by an independent assessor, not by my brother's Vancouver accountant. Reimbursement of the Sudbury due diligence costs I had fronted personally. My father signed the agreement in his kitchen. He was alone when he signed it. I know because Miss Hutchinson told me, not as a detail meant to wound, just a logistical note. He hadn't asked anyone to be there. My brother flew back to Vancouver 2 days later. Family opinion divided roughly along predictable lines. The aunt who had texted me about compromise told a cousin I had been ruthless. Several people I hadn't heard from in years expressed strong views about what I should have done, all in the direction of accepting less and being grateful for what remained. The same relatives who had spent years not asking how the company stayed afloat suddenly had sophisticated opinions about family loyalty. I let the opinions move through without holding on to them. That part was easier than I expected. What surprised me was my father. About 6 weeks after the settlement, I drove down to see him. Not for any particular reason, I just wanted to see him. We sat on his back deck in the November cold with the propane heater running between us. He had a blanket over his lap. He looked tired in a different way than before, not the tired of someone bracing for a fight, just tired. He didn't apologize. I hadn't expected him to. My father communicates through proximity more than words, through the fact of showing up or not showing up. He poured me coffee from a thermos without asking if I wanted any, and we watched the yard for a while without talking. Eventually he said, "You handled yourself." That was all. From him in the language we had always spoken to each other, I understood what it meant. My brother and I don't have a simple relationship now. I wouldn't call us close. But he called last spring when one of the service vans needed a major repair, and he had questions about the insurance claim, which was, in its way, the first time he'd called me about something that required actual operational knowledge. We talked for 20 minutes. It was functional and cordial and strangely okay. He asked at one point, carefully, whether I thought the company would be better off buying him out eventually. I said I thought that was worth discussing when the time was right. What I noticed in that conversation was that he was asking me, not telling me, not performing confidence he didn't have, just asking. That shift felt more significant than any legal document. The company is doing well. We're looking at a fourth location, further north, which is a harder market, but one I understand better than anyone, because I've been driving those highways for 15 years. I still work long hours. Some things don't change because of a settlement agreement, but I come home now to an apartment that doesn't carry the weight of other people's unexamined assumptions about what my contributions are worth. There's a particular lightness to that which I didn't know I was missing until it arrived. My nephew is 9 now. He came to visit me in Thunder Bay last summer with my brother's family, a trip my sister-in-law organized, which told me something about where things were settling. He wanted to see the river. We rented kayaks on a Sunday afternoon, and he talked the entire time about his school and his friends and a video game I didn't understand. I listened to all of it. It felt easy in a way that hadn't been available to us for a while. On the drive back from the river, he asked me what I did at work. I told him I ran a heating and plumbing company. He thought about this and then asked if that meant I fixed things when they broke. I said yes, more or less. He said that seemed important. I told him it was. I've been thinking lately about what the dinner table moment actually cost my brother, and I don't mean legally or financially. I mean the version of us that could have existed if things had gone differently, that April. There's a grief in that, quiet and specific. The relationship we might have had if he had looked at me differently across the table, if he had thought to say, at some point in 8 years, that what I was doing mattered. I don't carry resentment about it the way I used to. Resentment is a weight that doesn't make the person you're carrying it toward any lighter. I put it down somewhere around the time I signed the settlement papers, not because everything had been made right, but because what had been wrong was at least no longer invisible. My grandfather built the company with his hands. My father held it together through difficult years with my mother beside him at midnight over coffee and folders. I rebuilt it twice, quietly, with documentation and early mornings and 4-hour drives through northern Ontario winter. That history belongs to all of us. So does what comes next. But my name is on the building now, in writing, where it belonged. The night of that April dinner, my brother thought he was explaining to me what I was worth. What he actually did was remind me to stop letting other people do the calculating.